We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 27b. This daf is sponsored by David and Ariella Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amid or a daf, see the description box below, and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amid, the Gemara brought the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan understands our Mishnah, that when our Mishnah says that if the blood is applied to the wrong part of the Mizbeach, that it is puzzle, it means the carbon is completely disqualified. It doesn't provide even an atonement. It is totally puzzle. And the idea is that shelo b'mekomo is lav kimekomo dami. If the blood is applied in the wrong place of the Mizbeach, it is not the same as if it's applied in the proper place of the Mizbeach, and essentially it is not a good application of the blood. And on the previous summit, the Gemara asked, if that's the case according to Rabbi Yochanan, it should be the same as if the blood spills onto the floor, where we say that you can collect the blood again and then you can reapply it. So why don't we say the same in this situation? And on the previous summit, the Gemara answered that Rabbi Yochanan will say that our Mishnah follows the opinion that in such a situation where it reaches the wrong part of the Mizbeach, you're actually not allowed to gather up the blood again and reapply it. As the Gemara now continues, Umishna seinu kedivrei ha'omer lo yasvenu. Our Mishnah follows the one who says that you can't gather up the blood again. This is all following Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon that we quoted on the previous Amud in this regard. And Rashi over here continues and says, this is a continuation of Rashi from the previous Amud. He says it's impossible to say the time of the Rabbi Yossi. You cannot suggest, this is something that one might have suggested within Rabbi Yossi. One might have suggested that Rabbi Yossi holds mishum desvira le. Maybe Rabbi Yossi holds the shelo b'mekomo kimekomo dami. Maybe Rabbi Yossi holds that shelo b'mekomo is kimekomo dami, that even though it was applied in the wrong place, it was as if it was applied in the proper place, and maybe that's why Rabbi Yossi says that you don't gather it up again and apply it. That's not the case. Rabbi Yossi is saying that shelo b'mekomo is not considered kimekomo, and nonetheless, Rabbi Yossi says, even though it was applied in the wrong place, you cannot gather it up again. Again, our Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi, and Rashi explains why. Why can't you say that Rabbi Yossi holds shelo b'mekomo is kimekomo? Because if he held that, instead of arguing whether you can gather up that blood and apply it again, they might as well argue about the atonement itself. Rabbi Yossi keeper, it should have said Rabbi Yossi says it's an atonement. Rabbi Shimon, low keeper, Rabbi Shimon says it's not an atonement. It must be really that Rabbi Yossi holds that shelo b'mekomo is not kimekomo. And still Rabbi Yossi says, unlike Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi says you cannot gather up the blood again and redo it. And our Mishnah follows that opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And that's why it says it's disqualified in our Mishnah, because there really is no solution, unless, of course, as the Gemara mentioned on the previous summit, if there's still soul blood remaining in the animal, then you can apply that new blood. But according to our Mishnah, which follows Rabbi Yossi's opinion, you cannot apply the blood that was applied at the wrong part of the Mizbeach. You can't take that blood again and try to apply it in the proper place on the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues with another explanation of the machlokes tanoim between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon in terms of reapplying the blood that was applied improperly. Rav Chisda Amar Avimi, Rav Chisda says that Avimi says, Hakol Modin, everybody agrees. Rashi explains, Rav Chisda Amar Avimi, Hakol Modin, meaning Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, they both agree. Benitanin lamata shenesanin lamala. Let's say it was blood that was supposed to be applied on the lower part of the Mizbeach and it was applied on the upper parts. Shelo yasvena. So then you can't regather it. You cannot apply it again. V'chol shekain, and certainly benitanin lamala shenesanin lamata. Let's say it was supposed to be applied on the upper part and then it was applied on the lower part. Certainly you cannot regather it. Hoel v'damim hoel yonim lamata hein boin. And the reason for this logic is because the blood that's on top, it's going to drain down, it's going to run down the Mizbeach. Lo nechleku ela benitanin lifnim shenesanin b'chutz. The whole machlokus between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon is, let's say the blood was supposed to be brought into the Beis HaMikdash, instead it was placed on the Mizbeach outside the Beis HaMikdash, or b'chutz shenesanin lifnim, or let's say it was supposed to be outside the Beis HaMikdash on the Mizbeach, and instead it was brought into the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yasvenu, there Rabbi Yossi says you can gather up the blood and apply it properly. Rabbi Shimon Omer Lo Yasvenu, Rabbi Shimon says you cannot do that, you can't gather up the blood and apply it properly. And Rashi explains, Benitanin lamata shenesanin lamal, if it was supposed to be placed on the lower half of the Mizbeach and it was placed on the upper half, shelo yasvena, you can't regather it. The hoel v'nitan b'mizbeach haroilo, the point is, since it was placed on the proper Mizbeach, lo have kinishbach ala ritzba, so it's not like it was spilled on the floor, to kalte Mizbeach, the Mizbeach is considered to have captured the blood, so to speak, la fuke mechlal zrika b'makom acher, so you can no longer do the zrika in another place. V'chol shekein benitanin lamala shenesanin lamata, certainly if it was supposed to be placed above above and it was placed below, the krova hi lamatana gemura, that already is almost like doing it properly. Sharei damim ha'elyonim, because even if you put the blood up on top, lamata hein shosen v'yordan, it does drain downward. Hilkach, therefore, hai dam sofo layered lamata, even the blood placed on top will in the end be below. Hayoroi, it's fit to go below. V'chiyave lamata called him mizbeach. So again, if you actually applied it on the lower half, the mizbeach captured it again, so to speak. Mila osfo, so you can no longer gather it again. V'lachzer v'lino lamal, and go ahead and place it on the upper part. Sherabi Yossi Omer Yasfeno, but again, the whole question is in a situation where it was supposed to be inside, let's say the Beis HaMikdash, and it was placed outside, or the reverse, then Rabbi Yossi says you can gather it to Kevin de la Mizbeach, lo haya roy lo kalte klal, since it wasn't fit for the Mizbeach, so therefore it hasn't captured it, so to speak, at all. It was completely brought to the wrong place. For Rabbi Shimon Omer lo Yasfeno, Rabbi Shimon says no, you can't gather it up again and apply it properly. Sharei l'shem Mizbeach haya roy, v'harei ba l'shum Mizbeach, it was made to go to a Mizbeach, and it came to a Mizbeach. It might have been the wrong Mizbeach, but that does not matter according to Rabbi Shimon. You can't gather it up again and apply it again. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Afanon nami tanina. We learned this in a brisa as well. Rashi explains, Afanon nami tanina, di ise lid Rabbi Yochanan, meaning this brisa is going to support the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar that Rabbi Yochanan says, di iko di isle lo yasfenu, that there is a man de Amar that holds that you don't gather up the blood again and reapply it. V'afagav de shalom b'mekomo lav k'mekomo dami le'inyan kapara, even though applying the blood in the wrong place is not considered like applying it in the right place as far as kapara, so it's like you did nothing. But le'inyan asifa miu kalte mizbeach. But as far as gathering it up again, it is considered that it was already applied to the mizbeach, and therefore you cannot do it again. In other words, this price is going to support the idea that you can hold shaloba mekomo lav kemekomo dami, but at the same time say that you cannot gather it up again and reapply it. And we see that in the following brisa. The brisa says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Zos hi ha'ola. The pasuk says, Zos hi ha'ola harei elu mute, and these are all exclusions. What does it come to exclude? Prat l'nishchata balayla, it excludes, let's say the animal is slaughtered at night. V'shenishbach dam, or let's say the blood spilled. V'sheyatza dama chutz lakloim, or if the blood left the area of the curtains. Im also teirid, if it went up on the mizbeach, then it comes down from the mizbeach. Rashi explains, Zosia Ola, this is the Ola, Hare Elo Gimel Muyut, and these are three exclusions. Lefisha Boha Mikra Hazel Lelamdeno, because this pasuk is coming to teach us, Al Hapsulin Lamizbeach, that if something goes up on the Mizbeach and is disqualified, Sha'olo, if it went up on the Mizbeach, the lo yardu, it shouldn't come down from the Mizbeach. The Alfinan Me'ola Al Mokta Al Mizbeach Kol Halayla, we learned that out from the pasuk of Ola Al Mokta Al Mizbeach Kol Halayla, Misha Ola Al Mokta, once it goes up on the fire, Tehei Sham Kol Halayla, it should be there all night. Lafikach miyet lach bo gimel miyutin lemayit bo gimel psul, and that's why we have three exclusions to exclude these three cases of disqualification. Zos hi miyuta, that's an exclusion. Zos v'lo acheres means zos this and not something else. He have a miyuta, the word he is also a miyut. Hey de ha'ola, and also the letter hey in the word ha'ola have a miyuta, that's also an exclusion. Kilomar ha'ola hamiyuchedes v'lo kulan, and it applies to the ola but not to all of them. That's the three exclusions, and so therefore prat lenishbach dama v'shenishchata balayla v'sheyatza dama, we exclude these three cases. The blood spills out, or it was slaughtered at night, or the blood left the area. Avol shar psulin, but all other disqualifications, im alu lo yerdu, those once it's on the mizbeach, it doesn't come down from the mizbeach. These cases and these three exclusions, it does come down from the mizbeach. Ulekamon beperak hamizbeach mekadesh meforish taimid Rabbi Yehuda demarbi shar psulin umapik hanach, and later on the Gemara will explain the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda why he includes the other psulin, but he excludes these. And the brisa continues, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Ola, it says in the pasuk, Ola, Ein li ela Ola kshera, I only know that if it's a kosher Ola, it doesn't come down from the mizbeach. Minayin l'rabos shenishchata balayla v'shenishbach dama v'shiyatza dama chutz l'kloim. How do we know to include one that was slaughtered at night, if it's blood spilled, if it's blood left outside of the curtains of the azara, v'halon, or if it's left overnight, v'hayotze, if it leaves the azara, v'hatame, or if it's tame, v'shenishchat chutz l'zmano v'chutz l'mekomo, if it was slaughtered with intention to be consumed outside outside of the proper time or outside of the proper place. V'shekiblu psulin v'zarku es dama, if disqualified individuals received the blood and threw the blood. V'anitanin l'ma'alash and asan l'mato, or let's say the blood was supposed to be applied on the upper half of the mizbeach, it was applied on the lower half. V'anitanin l'matash and asan l'mala, it was supposed to be the lower half and it was applied on the upper half. V'anitanin b'fnim and asan b'chutz, it was supposed to be applied inside the Beis HaMikdash, it was applied on the mizbeach outside of the mikdash and the azara. V'anitanin b'chutz and asan b'fnim, it was supposed to be applied on the mizbeach and the azara. Instead, it was brought inside the Beis HaMikdash. V'hapesach v'hachatos sheshachtan shelo lishman, or the carbon pesach or the carbon chatos, which were slaughtered not for their sake. Minayin, from where do we know that all of those kinds of karbonos, they should be left on the mizbeach? Talmud lomar Torah sa'ola. The pasuk says Torah sa'ola riba Torah achas l'chola olan. It comes to include one law for all of those, for all of the karbonos shim alu lo yerdu, that if they go up, they do not come down. Yochol shani marba. Now one might think that I should also include af haroveya v'hanirba. Let's say an animal that was roveya, that means that it was with a person, or nirba means it was the object being with a person, bestiality. V'hamuksor, let's say it was designated for avodah zarah, v'hanevar, or worshipped as avodah zarah, v'esnan, or used to pay a prostitute, v'hamachir, or in exchange for a dog, v'hakilayim, or it was the product of kilayim, diverse kinds, v'hatreif, or it has a mortal wound, v'yotze dofen, or born by caesarean section. Talmud lomar, one might think to include all those, but the pasuk says zos. It says zos, and that means to say that those cases are excluded. Those cases do come down from the mizbeach. Now how do I know to include these and exclude those? Marbani eselu. So I include those shayapsulan bakodesh, where there was some disqualification in the process of the holiness. In other words, something happened. There was a machshava, let's say a wrong machshava. It was received. The blood was received by disqualified individuals, etc. But I exclude these cases, meaning cases where fundamentally there's something wrong with the animal, like it was worshipped as avodah zarah. Shelo hayapsulan bakodesh. That's not called a disqualification within the kodesh. And in any case, what's the proof from this brisa? Katani mia. Nevertheless, what does it say in this brisa? It says hanitanin lamata shenasanin lamala. It's talking about the blood being applied in the wrong place. It was supposed to be on the lower half. It was applied on the upper half. Ulamala shenasanin lamata, or the upper half, and it was supposed to be the upper half. It was placed on the lower half. And velo polig Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda over here does not argue. My time, and what's the reason he doesn't argue? Lav mishum de kolte mizbeach. Isn't Rabbi Yehuda saying that it's kolte mizbeach, that the mizbeach does in fact capture this blood? Ushma mino lo yasven. You see from here that you don't gather it up again and apply it again. And Rashi explains, and this is within the sheet of Rabbi Shimon in the Brisa, Ein li ela ola ksheira, I only know a kosher carbon ola te al mokta kol halayla aboka, that it remains on the fire of the Mizbeach the whole night until morning. V'halon, what about a case where it's left overnight? Shalon besara chutz l'Mizbeach, it means the meat is left overnight outside of the Mizbeach. V'hayotze sheyotze besara, yotze means that the meat leaves the proper area. V'hatame v'shenishchat, let's say tame, or let's say it was slaughtered al menas l'hakter chutz l'zmano, it was slaughtered with the intention of burning it, again, outside of the proper time or outside of the proper place. Minayin shekeven sha'olu lo yirdu. How do you know in all of these cases that once they go up on the Mizbech, they don't come down? And then we have the cases where they do come down, roveya v'nirba, the cases of sodomy, bestiality, al pi echad. That's always talking where there's one witness. Shem mutter lehedyot v'asur legavo. In those cases, it's mutter for a regular person, but it's still asur legavo, it's asur to the Mizbeach. V'nafki lon mikroy b'Meseches tmura b'perakol yisurin. That's learned out from Psukim in Meseches Tmura. V'chein muksa v'nevar utreifa. You have cases of designated for avodah zarah, worshipped as avodah zarah, or an animal that's a treifa. Muksa shekseu letekroves avodas kochav. Muksa means it's designated as an offering for avodah zarah. Nevad means shehishtachav elebehema. That means it was actually worshipped. The person bowed to the animal. And then we had a case of kilayim shor o kesev prat lekilayim. It says in the pasuk shor o kesev, that excludes kilayim, and ki voled prat leyotze dofen. When the pasuk says ki voled, that excludes a caesarean section. And Myra Isa, the Gemara then said, how do you know? Achar shariba hakasav umiyet. Once there's an inclusion and an exclusion. V'lo pirish lach hakasav ma'riba ma'miyet. But the pasuk is not clear what is included and what is excluded. Amritu me'atzmecha marbani yaselu. So it makes sense to say that we include those shayab sulan bakodesh, where the disqualification took place in the kodesh, meaning mishabol azar nifsalu, meaning after they came to the azar there was a disqualification. But again, we're not going to include the case cases like Avodah Zarah, where again there was a disqualification before that. In any case, what's the proof? Katani Mias, nevertheless, what does it say in this brisa? It says it has the cases where the blood is applied in the wrong place, and it says, Lo Yerdu, you don't take it off the Mizbeach. Velo Polig Rabbi Yehuda, and that was Rabbi Shimon who said that, but Rabbi Yehuda doesn't argue. L'shavinu kinishbach al haritzah, but he doesn't say that that's the same as being poured on the floor. V'neima Yardu, then to say that it does come down from the Mizbeach. Kedam Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda did say prat l'nishbach dama. He did exclude a case where the blood spills on the floor. V'al malav kinishbach dama kachashavle. The point over here is that Rabbi Yehuda, even though he said if it's spilled on the floor, it has that status, but nevertheless, in this case where it was misapplied on the wrong part of the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. And what's the reason? My time allow mishum to call it Mizbeach. Isn't it the same logic we just gave in Rabbi Yochanan, that we just said in Rabbi Yochanan above? Because the Mizbeach has already taken it. L'kedusha, it's already sanctified to an extent. Ushma mino l'inyan asifa lo yasfen. You see, it shouldn't be gathered up again. Now you can't say mishum to kosavar shelo b'mekomo k'mekomo dami, that the reason is because it's as if it was applied properly. Umishum de kippur, and there was an atonement. Umishum de kaparu, because there was an atonement. Da'adumya de shar zrikos psulos katanile, because this is included in other cases of zrika which were disqualified. So clearly what was done is not something that created an atonement. And so again, the reason is that you just can't gather it up again. And the proof here is from within Rabbi Yehuda on the assumption that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon. And Rashi notes, Rabbi Shimon, hainu time the lo maisile. Now why not just bring the proof straight from Rabbi Shimon? Because Rabbi Shimon is saying that if it was misapplied, you don't take it off the mizbeach, you don't gather it up again. We don't want to bring a proof from Rabbi Shimon. The ikol amemer, because one could say, time with Rabbi Shimon mishum de Torah sa'ola riba va'afilo nishbach damanami kamar de lo yerdu. Rabbi Shimon says Torah sa'ola is an inclusion, and even if the blood spilled onto the floor, Rabbi Shimon says lo yerdu. So that really wouldn't be a proof, because he goes so far as to say even if the blood spilled on the floor, it stays on the mizbeach. So of course, if it was misapplied, it would stay on the mizbeach. We specifically want to bring a proof within Rabbi Yehuda, who says that if it spills on the floor, it does come down. But if it's misapplied on the mizbeach to the wrong place on the mizbeach, then already we say kalte mizbeach. And again, that's in line with what we said in Rabbi Yochanan earlier. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, Mizbeach hapnimi, the inner Mizbeach, Mekadesh Psulin, it does sanctify that which is disqualified. And Rashi explains, Mekadesh Psulin means, Shem Olu lo yerdu, let's say something is disqualified, goes onto the inner Mizbeach, it also does not come down from that inner Mizbeach. V'afagav de lo ksiv kro ele bechitzon, even though the pasuk that we learn this idea from is talking about the outer Mizbeach, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that this applies to the inner Mizbeach as well. And the Gemara continues and says, "My kamash malan." Well, what's that teaching us? Tanina, we just learned that in the brisa above. Hanitanin bifnim v'chulu. One of the cases was you have a situation where it's supposed to be inside and then it's placed on the outside, or it's supposed to be outside placed on the inside. So there you have a situation of something that's disqualified from the inner mizbeach, and we're saying the same idea that it doesn't come down from the mizbeach. What is Rabbi Eliezer adding? And the Gemara continues and answers, "Imei hasim." If we only had that brisa over there, havamina hanimili dam. I would say that applies only to blood. Because in general, blood in general is sometimes brought on the inner mizbeach. Aval komets, but let's say the komets, the fistful by a carbon mincha, the lo chazile, that is not fit at all for the inner mizbeach. That is only meant for the outer mizbeach. So emalo, I might say it's not true. If it goes on the inner mizbeach, the komets, it would come down. Kamash malon, Rabbi Eliezer is saying even something like the komets, we apply this idea to, and we say it's mekadesh psulim. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following brisa. Ketores zor, if you have a strange ketores, sha'olu legavi mizbeach, that goes on the mizbeach, teiret, it comes down. She'ein loch mekadesh psulin ella mizbeach hachitzon. We only say there's an idea of mekadesh psulin when it comes to the outer mizbeach. Beroilo, if it's something that's fit for it. And so chitzon in, pnimi lo, it sounds like we're saying the outer mizbeach, yes, it's mekadesh psulin, but apparently that doesn't apply to the inner mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Tanina, first of all, we already learned this in the Brisa, Hanitanin b'chutz shenisanin b'fnim lo yerdu, if it's supposed to be on the outside, it goes inside, it doesn't come down. Evoreihim, those limbs don't come down, mizbeach, from the mizbeach. And again, v'lo polig Rabbi Yehuda never argues on that. My lav dekolte penimi ladam. Again, aren't we saying that the blood is being captured, so to speak, by the inner mizbeach, zeshen into olav, which it was placed on. V'afa bishen nifsal b'chnisas l'hechel. Now, even though that blood is disqualified when it enters the hechel, mishum v'chol chatas asher yuva midama, because because that's what the pasuk says, that the blood is brought inside improperly. Havale kenishbach dam. It's almost like the blood is spilled on the floor. And the Gemara then said, Hani mili dam. One might think that's only by the blood. Shapasalhu the mikdash the mekadesh hoel v'chazi le dam bialma. There we say that it's mekadesh since blood in general is fit for the mizbeach hapnimi in some scenarios. Kagon damim hapnimim, for example, the blood of the inner karbanos. Avol kometz lo chazi klal, but let's say kometz which is not fit at all for the inner mizbeach. Techsiv lo salu all of ketorah zara violo mincha. That's what it says in the pasuk. So eimim all of yer. I might think if it goes onto that mizbeach hapnimi comes down. Kamash Malana teaches us that is not the case. Ketores Zora, and then we brought a brisa which says if you have a strange ketores, it means ketores nedavish lo hitter hakasav ela ketores shel tzibor. Let's say it's a ketores that's a donation. The pasuk only allows the ketores of the community. Shachars v'arvis in the morning and the evening. Shalsa legavi hamizbeach that goes in the mizbeach. Kasal gadaytach div mizbeach haketores koi. Right now we think we're talking about the inner mizbeach. So we say beroilo. We say again the outer mizbeach. It's able to be mekadesh that which is roilo la'afuke kemotzim shelo kitchu bekli. That comes to exclude, let's say, have a kometz that wasn't sanctified properly in a vessel. That's what we say later on in Perek HaMizbeach. But again, we seem to be talking only about the outer Mizbeach and not the inner Mizbeach. That is the question. And the Gemara continues and answers on behalf of Rabbi Eliezer, Toretz Hachi. We can explain the brayso as follows. Ketores Zor, if you have a strange incense, Sha'ola l'mizbeach hachitzon, which goes on the outer mizbeach teirei, that has to come down. We're not talking about the inner mizbeach, we're talking about the outer mizbeach. She'ein mizbeach hachitzon mekadesh psulin, because the outer mizbeach does not sanctify that which is disqualified, elo haroilo, only things that are actually fit for the outer mizbeach. V'hapnimi, but when it comes to the inner mizbeach, bein roilo, bein she'ein roilo, whether it's fit or not, still we say that it is mekadesh, it's in line with Rabbi Eliezer. My time, and what's the reason for the difference between the mizbeach hachitzon and the mizbeach hapnimi? Because high ritzpah, the mizbeach hachitzon is considered to have the status of a floor, v'hai kli shores, but the mizbeach hapnimi is considered to have the status of a kli shores. And Rashi explains high ritzpah bevinyan avonim, it's built with stones shalom nimshach, which were never anointed with the anointing oil. Lafikach ein kedushasu b'zeh chamura, therefore they don't have that strict level of holiness. But v'hai kli shores, the mizbeach hapnimi is considered like a kli shores. V'nimshach im hamishkan, it was anointed together with the Mishkan, and so it has that higher level of Kedusha. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hashochet es hazevach, if somebody slaughters a korban lizrok doma bachutz, in order to throw the blood, meaning with the intention to throw the blood outside of the proper place, o mixas doma bachutz, or some of the blood, to throw it outside of the proper place, lahaktir a murav bachutz, to burn the sacrificial portions outside of the proper place, o mixas a murav bachutz, or part of the sacrificial portions outside of the proper place, lechol bisaro bachutz, to eat its meat, the meat of the korban outside of the proper place, o kazayis mi bisaro bachutz, or a kazayis from the meat of the korban outside of the proper place, o lechol kazayis me'or ha'alya bachutz, or to eat a kazayis from the hide of the tail outside of the proper place. In all of these cases, there's an intention to eat, to consume from the korban, or to eat from the korban outside of the proper place, and so the halacha is puzzle, it's disqualified. However, ve'ein bo kares, there is no kares in this situation, as we'll see in a moment. It's only when the intention is to consume the korban outside of the proper time that we say that it's pigul and there is kares. As the Mishnah now continues, lizrok damo l'machar, if somebody has intention to throw the blood tomorrow, that's outside of the proper time, or mixas damo l'machar, or some of the blood tomorrow, lahaktir a murav l'machar, to burn the sacrificial portions tomorrow, or mixas a murav l'machar, or some of the sacrificial portions tomorrow, lechol bisaro l'machar, to eat its meat tomorrow, or kazayis mi bisaro l'machar, or a kazayis from its meat tomorrow, or lechol kazayis me or ha'alya l'machar, or to eat a kazayis from the hide of the tail tomorrow. So in these cases, again, there's an intention to consume the korban outside of the proper time, so that's pigul, that's called pigul, v'chayav in all of kares, and there is a liability to kares in that case. And the Gemara says, Savru, right now we think, or ha'alya, or aliyah, that when it comes to the hide of the tail, and Rashi explains, es hazevach shlomim oshar hanechol, and the Mishnah over here is talking about a korban shlomim, or some other korban that is eaten, because the Mishnah is talking about eating the korban. Pasul ve'ein bo kares, so it's disqualified, again, outside of the proper time. If that's the intention, it's disqualified, but there is no kares. V'ha'ochlo, meaning one who eats it, va'afilo b'chutz, even outside of the proper place, ein onish kares, there is no punishment of kares. Lechol es besaro l'machar, if he has intention to eat the meat tomorrow, lekol le'ukma b'shlomim, Rashi notes, this part of the Mishnah, you cannot say it's talking about a shlomim. Ela betoda v'chatos v'yasham. It has to be talking about a carbon toda, or a carbon chatos, or a carbon asham. The ilu b'shlomim machar zmanu, because by a shlomim, tomorrow actually is still the proper time, because there's 2 days to eat a shlomim. Avol lizrok damo lahaktir emurav, but when the Mishnah talks about throwing the blood or burning the sacrificial portions, that's afilu b'shlomim. That would be even b'shlomim, havel machar chutz lizmanu. Tomorrow would be outside of the proper time. And Rashi continues, pigul v'chayav and all of kares. Again, if you have intention outside of the proper time, it is pigul, and there's a liability to kares, meaning ha'ochlo, if one eats that carbon, afilu b'zmanu, even in the proper time, but that carbon now became pigul because of the intention to eat it, not in the proper time. So onish kares, there is a punishment of kares of a Gemara Yalafla, and the Gemara will learn this out, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph.